turn it over to Jen.
Hello, welcome to the community listening session on housing and houselessness. This evening, community members will provide testimony to the City Council. This evening's meeting is focused on housing and houselessness. However, there will be time allotted at the end of this meeting for comments on any issue. My name is Jen Gray O'Connor, and I will serve as the facilitator for this evening. Let me start by providing you with an overview of our agenda. First, I'll read a statement on the rules of conduct for this evening. Then we'll hear a Budget 101 from Budget Director Jessica Kennard. Next, we'll hear invited community testimony on housing and houselessness, followed by community testimony on housing and houselessness. And then we'll hear community testimony on any topic. Following that, we'll conclude with remarks from our City Council members. There will be additional opportunities for you to make your voice heard to the City Council. We have 3 upcoming listening sessions. The first one will be Monday, April 12th from 6 to 8 p.m. And that will be a community listening session on economic stabilization and recovery. Following that, we'll have a community listening session on Saturday, April 17th from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. And that community listening session will be on community safety. Lastly, we'll have a more general meeting on Wednesday, May 5th from 6 to 8 p.m. And that will be the mayor's proposed budget hearing. In addition to those listening sessions, you can always provide online testimony at portlandoregon.gov/CBO. You can also email testimony to budgetcomment@portlandoregon.gov. Okay, next I'm going to read a statement on electronic meetings and followed by our rules of conduct for the evening. Under Portland City Code and state law, the City Council is holding this meeting electronically. All members of council are attending remotely by video or by teleconference, and the city has made several avenues available to the public to listen on audio broadcast of this meeting. The next meeting is available to the public on the city's YouTube channel, eGovPDX, at portlandoregon.gov/video, as well as channel 30. The public can provide written testimony to council on the budget office website, which is portlandoregon.gov/CBO, as well as by email at budgetcomment@portlandoregon.gov. The council is taking these steps as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the need to limit in-person contact and promote social distancing. The pandemic is an emergency that threatens public health, safety, and welfare, and which requires us to meet remotely by electronic communications. Thank you all for your patience, flexibility, and understanding as we manage through this difficult situation to do the city's business. Okay, next I'm going to read our rules of conduct for this evening. The City Council represents all Portlanders and meets to do the city's business. The presiding officer preserves order and decorum during City Council meetings so everyone can feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe. To participate in the council hearing, participants apply to give testimony online. If you did not apply and you would like to give your testimony to the council, please submit the testimony in writing at portlandoregon.gov/CBO. When testifying, please state your name for the record, but your address is not necessary. Declare if you are a lobbyist. If you are representing an organization, please identify it. You have 2 minutes to testify. You'll be timed by staff, and when your time is over, you'll be given a verbal warning and then muted when 2 minutes have passed to allow for as much participation as possible. Disruptive content such as shouting, refusing to conclude your testimony when your time is up, or interrupting others' testimony will not be allowed. If there are disruptions, a warning will be given that further disruption may result in a person being placed on hold or ejected from the remainder of the meeting. Please be aware that all council meetings are recorded. Thank you for helping your fellow Portlanders feel welcome, comfortable, respected, and safe. So tonight we'll be listening to community members provide testimony to our decision makers to help inform this budget as well as future budgets. And so to help orient us to this process, we will be hearing from Budget Director Jessica Kennard to give us a Budget 101. So I'll turn it over to Director Kennard.
Jen, before you do that, thank you for the introduction.
And I also want to thank you for facilitating our session. This is very important, and I want to thank you, and I want to thank staff and our invited testimony for participating. I'm going to call out a reality, which is there's a lot of competition tonight for attention, as you can imagine. And so a lot of people, I'm guessing, are going to hear this not necessarily live, but secondhand. They might see it on television. Could you repeat the email address again that you read earlier? So if people see this after tonight, Monday night, and they want to comment, they can still comment by email. Could you just repeat that email again?
Sure. Thank you, Mayor Wheeler. That's a good point. We want to make sure we have all testimonies. So if you want to email, you can email to budgetcomment@portlandoregon.gov. And just really quick, I'm going to spell it out. It's budgetcomment, BUDGETCOMMENT @portlandoregon.gov. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
Okay, great. And we'll hear from Director Kennard now.
Thank you, Jen. And I also do have that address on a slide in this presentation that I'm going to be giving. So please, if folks have a pen and paper handy, know that that will be coming as well. Good evening, everybody. My name is Jessica Kennard, and I am the city's budget director. I'm going to provide you with a very brief high-level overview of the city's budget to help inform and empower your engagement tonight and in the future. Next slide, please. So the city is not the only entity providing important public services to Portlanders, and we partner with other local and regional governments to provide comprehensive services to our communities. The county, which for Portland includes Multnomah, Clark, and Washington counties, provides human services, public health services, libraries, the district attorney, and management of the jail, parole, and probation systems, among other services. TriMet provides bus, light rail, and commuter rail service in the greater Portland metropolitan region. And Metro plans for the future of the Portland region and provides parks, venues, and services that cross city and county lines. Next slide, please. So at the city, we organize our bureaus and services into 7 major service areas, all pictured on this slide, with the exception of elected offices. The city's Bureau of Transportation manages traffic infrastructure, parking, the streetcar, and locally owned roads. The public utilities include the Bureau of Environmental Services and the Water Bureau. Public safety includes Portland Police, Fire and Rescue, 911 call taking, and emergency management services. Parks and Recreation is a single bureau, but has several functions and services, as you can see on this slide. Community Development includes the Bureau of Development Services, which manages our permitting and review processes, our Planning and Sustainability Bureau, the Office of Community and Civic Life, the Housing Bureau, and the Office for Community Technology. And then finally, City Support Services includes all of those back office functions that support the frontline service provision. Next slide, please. So this chart shows how the city's total $5.6 billion budget is divided amongst these 7 service areas. These total budget figures include both operating dollars for day-to-day functions as well as dollars for multi-year needs. So you'll see in this slide that the largest service area is our public utilities, followed by administration and support. This is because these functions hold large multi-year capital and debt financing plans, so their total budget figures incorporate much more than their annual operating budgets. Next slide, please. Budget conversations and decisions often focus on general fund discretionary resources, as these resources can be allocated with few restrictions. However, of the total city's budget, only about 10% is comprised of discretionary resource. It's important to remember that as we talk about general fund discretionary allocations, that we're only talking about a relatively small piece of the city's budget pie. Next slide, please. So the city's current year adopted budget included just under $570 million of general fund discretionary resource, and this chart shows how these resources are allocated amongst the city's service areas. The majority of general fund discretionary dollars are used to support public safety services, including police, fire and rescue, and the 911 call taking system. The Police Bureau is the largest allocation of discretionary resource, followed by fire and rescue. Additionally, the city spends a notable portion of discretionary resources on parks and recreation and community development services, such as homeless services and planning services. Next slide, please. Our city economist, Josh Harwood, is responsible for forecasting our available general fund discretionary resources over a 5-year horizon. Josh's most recent forecast, produced in February, anticipates a deficit of $20.2 million in discretionary resource heading into next year. This means that the City Council will need to close a budget gap of over $20 million, either by reducing expenditures or by identifying new revenue, in order to present a balanced budget as required by Oregon statute over the next few months. Next slide, please. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a profound, albeit nuanced, impact on a number of city revenue streams. Several revenue streams, as listed in red, are currently experiencing or anticipated to experience significant declines as a result of the impacts of the public health crisis. However, due in large part to the generosity of Portland voters, it's not all bad news. This coming year, Portland communities will be benefiting from two new voter-approved revenue streams with the Portland Parks Levy and with the Metro Tax for Supportive Housing Services. The funding for the latter will come to the Joint Office of Homeless Services via Multnomah County. We are also awaiting finalized rules and guidance for local allocations of the Federal American Rescue Plan Act, which will provide much needed financial support. Next slide, please. The focus of today's listening session is on housing and houselessness services. As such, I wanted to briefly share budgetary information pertinent to this issue area. Several city bureaus provide services that interact with issues related to houselessness. However, the largest and most focused entity addressing houselessness is the Joint Office of Homeless Services, which is a jointly funded venture between the city and the county. The Joint Office is housed at the county, which allows the office to be more closely connected to the provision of human services and public health functions offered by counties. The Joint Office's fiscal year 21-22 requested budget totals $149 million. This includes $37.1 million requested from City General Fund and $27.3 million requested from County General Fund, and includes a planned allocation of nearly $56 million in new Metro Supportive Housing Services Fund resources. Next slide, please. On the housing side of the continuum, the Portland Housing Bureau's requested budget for the upcoming fiscal year totals just under $200 million, divided by programs as seen on this slide. You can see that the majority of these funds are allocated to support the financing of rental housing. Most notably, $138 million is budgeted from two recently voter-approved housing bond measures. Again, thanks to the generosity of our voters. Next slide, please. For more information on the city's budget, I encourage you to visit our office's website at portlandoregon.gov/CBO, as you see on this slide. We also welcome email with your budget questions. These are for any sort of budget questions that you have. We'd be happy to respond to at citybudgetoffice@portlandoregon.gov. Next slide, please. And then finally, you may also visit our website, as you heard from Jen earlier, in order to share your thoughts on the city's budget. As you heard from Jen, today is the first of 4 all-council budget outreach events. You may sign up for future events by going to the Budget Office website. Additionally, you may submit online testimony by visiting the Budget Office website or by the Portland Maps website as listed on this slide. And you may also email your comment to budgetcomment@portlandoregon.gov, also listed on this slide. All written testimony will be shared with the council. This concludes my presentation. I'll turn it back over to Jen.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Next, we're going to move into the portion of our evening where we'll hear invited community testimony. Just to give you some background, council offices connected with community members to ensure that at this hearing, we hear from a diversity of voices during our listening session. Our first testimony of the evening is dedicated to this invited testimony, which will be followed by open testimony to the public. There'll be 2 minutes for this testimony, and our timekeeper, Zach Johnson, will be keeping time. When your 2 minutes is up, he'll say time, and then that'll be your opportunity to go ahead and conclude your comments. Just as a note, if you are joining us by phone, make sure you use *6 to mute or unmute as our testimony begins. And now Zach will read our first 3 invited speakers.
Hello. So the first 3 people we will hear from tonight are Jesse Burke, Katrina Holland, and Lisa Larson. In that order, we will start with Jesse Burke.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes.
Okay, my name is Jesse Burke. I am the owner of the Society Hotel in the Old Town neighborhood. I'm also a mother of 3 children. I grew up very poor, and I'm a former social worker and teacher. I'm testifying today in support of the creation of organized camps in Portland city limits. The current state of the city, our highways, and our neighborhoods is untenable and completely lacking in the symbiosis needed for a city's ecosystem. I consider this the first step that is necessary to begin to create a sense of order out of the chaos that has become our city. However, we must commit to the full programming of these spaces, not simply allowing parks to be used as anyone desires, but organized sites with a fenced perimeter, garbage service, toilets, and regular on-site management. I completely understand the hesitation of so many when we hear the word temporary and speaking about placing organized camps in our city's parks and city-owned parking lots, because all too often, temporary has resulted in permanent changes, often done without further public input. And it feels like when we give an inch, a mile is taken. However, I want to offer my support with cautious optimism. I've written to each of you no fewer than 4 times in the last 6 months, every letter addressing key issues and suggestions. One of these suggestions was creating a clear place that you can camp and clear places you cannot, and that these rules be consistently enforced. To allay the public's concerns, you must clarify what order will look like, how it will be maintained, and what will happen if anything gets out of order. Second, you must create benchmarks for yourself to measure success. And third, you need to communicate with us what the next phase looks like. We don't want this to be the plan for our parks forever. There are 3 important areas I want to be sure are addressed when creating these new ideas to address our city's crisis. 1, always begin with the end in mind. This means begin each project with a clear vision of your desired outcome. What does your ideal vision look like for the city of Portland? Because only when we know where we want to go can we make a roadmap to get there. I'm almost done. 2, if we always start with empathy, if the empathy is refused, we must move to enforcement. And 3, remembering our social contract with one another. In order to be caught in our city's safety net, we also commit to working towards getting back to being a contributing member of society. That is everything. Thank you.
Next, we have Katrina Holland. Katrina? Looks like you're muted. Okay, we can come back to Katrina after we go to Lisa Larson. Lisa?
Sorry about that. I ended up having difficulties there for a moment.
No problem.
First of all, thank you for having me here to talk tonight. My name is Lisa Larson, and I am currently Vice Chair at Dignity Village, where I have resided now for the last 11 years. I've held many other positions in the village, and I'm also part of the Board of Directors of Central North Neighborhood Association. Dignity Village is a great working model for alternative housing. We are the only city-sanctioned, self-supporting, self-governing homeless community that we know of in North America. And the city has granted us the land that we're on, but everything else we pay for. And that's very empowering to us, which it runs about $4,000 a month to run this village. And we do that by each one of us paying some money. We also have some micro businesses, and we survive out here. Dignity Village can have about 60 full-time residents. We also help many other homeless people in the area with our day use facility and with our donations building that they have access to. When my husband and I arrived out at Dignity Village, we were both broken. I came out of a very abusive situation, and when we were living out on the streets, he developed schizophrenia. But because of the safety and the secure feeling we have here at Dignity Village, we've both healed. He's off meds and has been now for 6 years. And I'm sitting here talking to all of you, a little nervous, of course, but I wouldn't have been able to do that before. I was afraid of my own shadow. Dignity Village was a miracle for us. It was a safe place for us to land, to heal, and to rebuild. And I really feel like there needs to be more villages putting people into shelters. Yeah, okay, it's a roof over their head, but they're not learning how to rebuild themselves. They're letting other people make their choices. And out of dignity, being self-governed, we make our own choices. In my opinion,
Did we lose Lisa?
Looks like she froze.
and easier to set up and far less expensive to run. So I really feel like the village type model is the way to go. Thank you.
Okay, I want to loop back to Katrina Holland. Katrina, are you available? Okay, we can come back at the end of the meeting and try again. So our next three speakers are going to be Bob Stoll, Seyhan McKelvey, and Kaya Sand. So we'll start with Bob.
Hi, I appreciate having the opportunity to talk tonight. I'm the co-chair with Katrina Holland of Here Together, which was the creator of the Metro Supportive Housing Revenue Measure. It had the support of over 500 organizations and community leaders, and that's essentially why it got passed. We're very supportive of the Multnomah County implementation plan, which of course the city of Portland is part of. I'm not going to talk about specifics of the budget for homelessness today, but I would like to make 2 points that I think are critical to success with homelessness. Number one is the elimination of silos. And by silos, I mean silos between the counties, the city, the county, the supportive housing revenue measure is to cover the metro region, all 3 counties of Multnomah, Clackamas, and Washington counties. And we need to break the silos down between those counties. We also need to break down the silos within each county and within the city. In other words, housing, you can have people that are need housing, mental health, have issues with law enforcement and other services. And there has not been enough communication heretofore between those different areas. The other thing that is critical to success on homelessness, and this is documented with many, many studies, and that is getting data, reliable data on tracking individuals, not just gross numbers. So you have, I think there was reports that you've seen saying there's 12,000, 10,000, whatever number of individuals that are homeless. That's all nice and good. But are they the same people today that they were a year ago? And if you are going to accurately measure whether you are and hold accountable whether you are succeeding, you need to find out what happened to Bob Stoll. If he was homeless on the street now, is he homeless a year from now? And was he there 2 years ago? The gross number tells you only that there are so many people on the street. Most of the people that are on the street are episodically homeless. So they may have been there for 3 months. They could be there for 10 or 12 months or whatever. But you need to be tracking this information and tracking within the various jurisdictions. Thank you.
Next, we have Seyhan.
Good evening, good people. First, just want to say thank you to Mayor Wheeler and all the city commissioners for taking time to listen to all of these different voices tonight. Just wanted to share a couple points about how some of our culturally specific providers specifically view a few of the issues with regards to supporting supportive housing services. I think that mental and behavioral health services, as well as addiction services, are needs that are probably universally agreed upon. But in order to keep with an approach of equitable collaboration with our various community-based organizations, and specifically our culturally specific partners who work with the city, I think that there is a more important supportive service with that can't be overlooked as we go through the process to administer these funds, and that is our unlicensed coordinators or advocates or coaches or community health workers or whatever different folks might call that, but the unconditional supportive person who is going to be able to be that coach, who's going to be able to be that mentor, who's going to be able to be that teacher, who's going to be able to be the person for our various community members who are needing to access supportive housing services. We have to make sure that that unconditional supportive person exists and is not tied to someone's participation or engagement with addiction services or mental or behavioral health services. And ensuring that that is there is something that, again, would be in the spirit of keeping with collaborative partnership with our community-based organizations who apply that method universally across the board. But we just have to make sure that we don't overlook that unlicensed professional with a mode or a service delivery method that prioritizes the licensed professional services that are also needed. And then the other point I wanted to make sure we're able to make, that as we work with our other jurisdictional partners to come to a jurisdictional solution for the homeless problem that we all see and feel and touch in the work that we do in our everyday lives, just in living with our neighbors and our community members who are experiencing this, we have to work together to make sure that there is regional access to the regional solutions that we are trying to create. And by that, I will want to emphasize that we are able to utilize our funding flexibly throughout the region. That if we are a provider in Multnomah County and somebody comes to us from Washington or Clackamas County, we don't have to tell that person, go find another access point because you're outside of my jurisdiction. And I know that that has been the reality. That is the reality that we can't change with some of the funding that we receive, but this funding that we get to shape, I would love to see us be able to take that level of flexibility into account so that anybody can access what they need anywhere within our region. And that will take some cooperation, that will take some collaboration, that takes flexibility, but we can make that happen. And I think that's very important for our community members to be able to have that level of regional access as we create this, what we're hoping is a regional solution to the issues that we face regarding houselessness. And again, thank you so much for listening to our different voices tonight.
All right, it looks like Katrina Holland is ready now. Katrina?
Yes, good evening. Sorry about that. It's dinner time, and you know when dinner time goes, you got to answer with kids 6 and 4. So thank you for the accommodation. Good evening, everybody. For the record, my name is Katrina Holland. I am Executive Director of Join, which is a homeless services agency that provides services mostly in Multnomah County. Has recently branched out into one project in Clackamas County, and excited to share our perspective tonight on budget considerations. So I think what's really important, I think, in this conversation and in this budget cycle, understandably so, a lot of commissioners are facing some pressure from the public in trying to resolve some of the issues that we've seen on the streets with folks who are living in tents and in semi-permanent structures that have been a little bit difficult for some of our neighbors. And we have heard and have discussed with commissioners, both in the city and in Multnomah County, the idea perhaps of trying to expand alternative sources of camping and shelter, as well as expand our shelter system. For the record, I want to make sure that folks understand that Join is supportive of that. And we also want to be very clear in saying that Resources are limited, and so we do hope that the commitment to housing first as a priority will continue to be a priority with our discretionary dollars in homeless services that we invest in through the joint office. And in particular, I really want to call out an opportunity that we see to give folks the opportunity to get off the streets relatively quickly, while at the same time offering opportunity for permanent housing or semi-permanent, depending on the situation, housing stability, but opportunities to end their homelessness. And that is with master leasing. It's not a new concept that folks have talked about. It's something that is done through many of our agencies in the provider network. But we do believe that there is a unique opportunity right now where we could dedicate some dollars toward master leasing private market units and providing permanent supportive housing services or wraparound services for those in which alternative camping or shelter may not work. And we're really adamant about this because our model has shown that it works extremely well and is extremely effective. Because in many cases, the folks who are living on the streets were at one point, as described earlier, living in a home. And so they can be successful in doing so. A lot of the sort of thoughts and stories and perceptions about who our friends are on the street is very different than what our experience has shown. And so just to give a little bit of a teaser on this, at Join, we do provide mobile permanent supportive housing services. We have a shared caseload of about 180 folks shared amongst 7 different agencies with a behavioral health care provider, as well as caseworkers to help maintain permanent housing opportunity, or I'm sorry, not permanent housing, primary care. That's what I'm looking for, primary care. And about 95% of the folks that enter our program are successful 6 and 12 months after they have been placed into housing within that same unit. And so we do see an opportunity with the urgency of getting folks off the street, of partnering with some of our private housing providers right now, master leasing those units and placing folks into that space. So that is something that we'd like to see prioritized as a budget priority. And while I have you, I will also say, in addition to that, we are advocating strongly that the Metro Supportive Housing Services dollars, and we'd appreciate the City of Portland advocating for this to also address a wage and compression issue in the housing provider network. And I'm pretty sure, Commissioner Rubio, you can talk about this like the back of your hand, but it's been a long-standing issue where a lot of our workers are making what will now be considered minimum wage, yet providing care and services to folks that is well beyond what minimum wage should be. And oftentimes it makes us compete, unfortunately, with folks in the government system. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to more discussion about this. Thank you.
Next, we have Kaya Sand.
Good evening. I'm Kaya Sand. I'm the director of Street Roots, and my thanks for the opportunity to testify tonight. As we look at the city budget, as well as the incoming American Rescue Plan Act federal funds, I call on us to really feel how we need to be transformed by this pandemic. Street Roots vendor Leo Rhodes told me that going back to normal isn't good for people for whom the norm has never been good. The same old is not enough. And so this means that we invest in the Housing Bureau, the Joint Office for Homeless Services, knowing that when rent comes due, the evictions will be massive, and we can't just close our eyes and hope. Street Roots vendor, poet Peter Saltzman wrote, "Outcast and abandoned, we cannot pay our rent." And when people can't pay their rent like Peter, they too often end up on the cold ground. They need access to rent assistance, rent cancellation, eviction prevention, cash so urgent for people to stay housed. Our post-pandemic city will be populated by more open buildings. We need to be bold, we need to be nimble, and how those buildings can expand the urgency of our singular goal of housing, 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 housing. And I want to emphasize that even though our topic is homelessness and housing, we should read every single bureau's budget through how housing is possible and survival can be made better. I'm thinking about budgets like the Bureau of Emergency Communications, where 911 operators pick up call after call of people reporting unhoused people. And if we truly want them to be able to shut those calls away from police responses and the ensuing barriers to housing and employment that legal entanglements provoke, and if we want that staff to possess the skills to recognize when people are weaponizing 911 against our communities of color, then we have to invest in BOIC, as well as Portland Fire and Rescue to grow Portland Street Response and its other programs like the Community Health Assessment Team, which is so important to people experiencing homelessness. And my final point is just to recognize that we have made some gains for people living without housing in our region during the past year as a result of the pandemic and the regional fires. The tiny houses on city land like C3PO, car and RV safe parking during the fires that were through outside jurisdictions, motel purchases for housing also through the state, cash for the poor, public toilets. And I want to emphasize the portable red toilets. I want to make sure those stay funded. They've been funded by FEMA, by CARES. I want to make sure that we keep those going, use ARPA funding, whatever, but it's really, really important. They've been transformative for people. And then I want us to look beyond that. Nicholas Kristof, in a recent column in the New York Times, called for a federal infrastructure of public restrooms. So I really call on a cross-council effort to make sure that we look at a hygiene infrastructure that's good and right for all Portlanders. Maybe it's through the Bureau of Environmental Services and the way that that bureau stepped up to support RV waste. But we have to actually confront our lack of hygiene infrastructure for unhoused people, for delivery folks, for meter readers, for travelers, because if we don't, we're actually investing in ongoing antagonism. So as you look at every budget for every bureau tonight, please do it fixed on the commitment that housing is a right and survival in the meantime must not be so desperate either. We can do both at once. Thank you very much.
Our next three speakers are going to be Tony DeFalco, Ernesto Fonseca, and Andy Goebel. In that order, we will start with Tony.
Thank you. Good to see you, Mayor Wheeler and commissioners. Thank you for this opportunity to speak this evening. My name is Tony DeFalco, and I serve as the Executive Director of Latino Network. The Latinx community continues to struggle with adequate housing and underrepresentation in data relative to houselessness. Our community members are doubling up and tripling up to be able to withstand both the ongoing economic challenges our community faces and the more specific challenges we face during this pandemic. Moreover, we face harassment from landlords who threaten to call ICE on community members that complain about living conditions, thereby having a chilling effect on the ability to secure safe and affordable housing. We also experience fear of retaliation when we do seek government assistance, making our population very challenging to reach. Therefore, we recommend 3 actions for the council when considering the budget relative to housing and houselessness. Number 1, keep up and increase the investment in the joint office for 2 reasons. This can serve as a regional template when we're looking at Here Together dollars regionally. 2 is to increase through that investment in community partnerships. Our communities require the specific assistance of trusted intermediaries to access resources, to prevent eviction, and so on. And we continue to experience underinvestment in that area. 2 is to plan for the potential of state approaches to extending the eviction moratorium failing. If those fail, we will see significant evictions increase for our community members who are already experiencing significant eviction actions in terms of the harassment they face. Third, and finally, I'll just echo a point that was raised by very well by previous speaker, Katrina, where she talked about wages We are asking the council to include a COLA, cost of living adjustment, and a 5% wage escalator annually on contracts for community partners. Our workforce is often not able to continue to live in Portland on the wages that they receive under these contracts, and are often in the position of actually seeking public assistance, the same public assistance of the folks that they are serving. As was noted before, there is a wage gap between public sector employees who provide these services and nonprofit sector employees who do, and we need to close that to increase retention, increase the kind of support that we're able to provide, and provide for long-term sustainability of the supports that community partners are able to provide to folks in need. Thank you very much.
Next, we have Ernesto.
Thank you, everybody. I hope you can hear me well. My name is Ernesto Fonseca. I am the Chief Executive of Hacienda CDC, and I've been living in Portland for the past 4 years. I've been delighted to see how Portland is really trying to push forward into addressing some of the many critical issues that the West Coast is facing. However, we know that the homelessness pandemic, which was one of the most severe that I've ever seen on the West Coast, especially in the Northwest, is really getting out of control, and it's been out of control for years now. I do believe that we need to really strongly start, strategizing many of the things that we've already been working on for years and years, and take into consideration when we're developing the budget, these values that we continue to talk about, into strategizing this idea of shelter to housing in a very structured way. Like Katrina said, and Tony said, many of the people that we serve are not necessarily people that are facing homelessness on the streets, but instead they are doubling up, tripling up, overcrowding their housing conditions. And those conditions are not necessarily healthy for anybody, especially for kids that are trying to attend the school, trying to focus and do the things that they need to do in order for them to succeed in life. That is one other factor that keeps us in a lower situation, economically speaking. So I strongly support and I strongly ask the council for us to really envision those values that we talked about for years and years into bringing this housing of shelter, keeping people out of the streets, into affordable housing, and then permanent, probably and hopefully housing that is owned by these individuals. The Here Together campaign was very strong across the state, and we need to really uphold those values, and that funding has to go to those communities, including communities of color that are experiencing houselessness in different forms than the typical houselessness that we see on the streets. More than that, I really encourage all of us to continue to think about the many different strategies that we've been using, including increasing our leverage dollars by partnering with private companies and communities of color, such as Hacienda CDC, NEA, PCRI, and other organizations that are doing the work here in Portland and other communities across the state. I do believe that if we put our hands together and we establish either those master leases or you partner with us, we will be able to house many of those individuals that are currently experiencing homelessness, are getting out of homelessness, or are at risk of experiencing that homelessness. The Latino community is a little different. We tend to not necessarily leave people in the street, but we tend to double up. So I want you to repeat that one more time. Overcrowding, it is still houselessness. It is still being homeless. That doesn't mean that you need to see us on the streets for us to be houseless. Because of that, I really encourage all of us to bring those values that I mentioned earlier and put them in our budget so we can invest much more on affordable housing. This will never end in terms of investing in housing and in communities of color and other communities across the state. Not every community is as Latino as Southern Oregon or other communities that we see in the state. But in terms of Portland, I think we need to take an action relatively sooner than later to bring that continue to a really structured fashion. With that said, I thank you very much, everyone, for listening to us today, and thank you.
Next, we have Andy.
Hi, my name is Andy Goebel, and I'm the Director of Emergency Management at Do Good Multnomah. I want to thank you for allowing me the opportunity to be here today to talk about the work of sheltering and supporting individuals experiencing houselessness in our city. In my role, I've had the privilege of partnering with the Joint Office of Homeless Services on several different sheltering projects, beginning with my time as the manager of the North Portland Winter Shelter, hosted by Portsmouth Union Church, where I serve as one of the pastors. That project was expanded in March of 2020 when the pandemic began, and the Joint Office asked us at Do Good to expand our operations from overnight at the church to 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, utilizing the Charles Jordan Community Center. Since that time, hundreds of folks have been sheltered and supported at that site safely and in a socially distanced manner. In July of last year, Do Good also partnered with the Joint Office to open 3 motel-based alternative shelters, where we serve at least 40 individuals at each site. At these sites, we are also able to provide housing services for folks staying there. And therefore, we've seen dozens of individuals placed in permanent supportive housing from these shelter locations. And to be clear, the Charles Jordan Shelter and the 3 motel shelter sites were an answer to a need in a time of crisis. And it's only because the city was able to be flexible with funding support that we at Do Good were afforded the opportunity to do this essential work. I can't stress enough how important the city's role has been in giving us a chance to do what we do best. And I want to personally thank all of you for the resources to do so. The last project I want to mention just so happens to have opened today. This afternoon, St. John's Village, a project made up of 19 beautifully constructed living pods, along with a truly amazing community building with a shared kitchen, showers, laundry, restroom, and community space, welcomed our first participants to their new transitional home. This village is exactly the kind of creative alternative to traditional congregate sheltering that our city needs right now. And I look forward to being a part of opening several more of these villages to be places where individuals can safely journey toward permanent supportive housing in a beautiful community environment. I believe projects like the St. John's Village are the future of supportive sheltering, and I'm thankful for the city's partnership in seeing this project through to its opening today. Again, I want to thank you for the opportunity to share, and thank you especially for your continued support in doing this important work.
Our last invited testimony will come from Trevor Nissen. Trevor?
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Trevor Nissen. I'm the manager of the Transition Project's Banfield Shelter Motel. We're a joint office of homeless services funded emergency shelter serving 50 highly vulnerable people experiencing homelessness at night. As you're planning next year's budget, Transition Projects has 2 asks for you to consider. First, as our community considers expanding the availability of shelter, we need to keep focused on the responsibility of ensuring our existing shelter capacity is being used to its fullest. This means ensuring that shelter guests flow through shelter and into housing as quickly as possible. As the city makes decisions on how it wants to support shelter services in the coming year, Transition Projects urges that we first make sure that we are maximizing the utility of our existing beds by fully funding the key support services, including rental assistance, housing case management, and wellness supports that we know are essential in helping shelter guests get housed. Second, our community has undervalued the work of frontline homeless service workers for too long. Many of my colleagues are themselves in need of the same social benefits that we are helping their clients access every day. Transition Projects and other agencies doing this essential work need the help of Multnomah County and the City of Portland to provide just wages to the workforce. And that starts with ensuring our agencies can depend on a consistent annual cost of living adjustment in our contracts with the city and county. Please help ensure that we as a community take care of our caregivers. Thank you. Yield my time.
Okay, I will now turn it over to Jen to introduce the next section of comment.
Thank you so much. I'm deeply appreciative of our invited testimony. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts. We're now going to move to our open testimony on housing and houselessness. Again, each participant will be given 2 minutes for testimony. Zach will be timing the testimony and will tell you when it's time. Again, if you're using a phone, make sure that you push *6 to be able to mute or unmute yourself. And so Zach will read our first 3 participants.
Thanks, Jen. The first 3 for community testimony are Brian Hoop, Tyler from Free Lunch Collective, and Tyler Gonzalez Aguera. So we will start with Brian. Brian?
You hear me?
We can.
Dear Mayor Wheeler and members of City Council, my name is Brian Hoop. I join you tonight speaking for Housing Oregon in support of the Portland Housing Bureau's requested budget. We strongly support the continued efforts of the Housing Bureau towards centering their policies and budget priorities on expanding affordable rental housing and homeownership opportunities for Black, Indigenous, and people of color and low-income households throughout Portland. Housing Oregon is a membership-based statewide association of 45 affordable housing nonprofits committed to serving and supporting low-income Oregonians across the housing needs spectrum, from homeless to homeowner. And we concur with the Portland Housing Advisory Commission urging City Council to not hold the Housing Bureau to the 5% cut across all bureaus. Communities of color and low-income communities continue to face disparate economic challenges brought on by the COVID pandemic and economic downturn, and now is not the time to cut their budget. There are 3 points I wanted to share for consideration about future city housing and homeless service budgets. Number 1, the forecast for Portland Housing Bureau's base budget for development faces a significant shortfall after fiscal year 24 with no additional funding sources in the pipeline. Tax increment financing and voter-approved Portland construction bond funds will be phasing out then. And so now is the time to begin planning what comes next. So Housing Oregon members are committed to work with the city to help identify sources and develop partnerships to advocate for new resources. We need to identify ongoing general fund support to replace the TIF Urban Renewal District resources as those districts continue to phase out. And we also invite city leadership to begin engaging with Housing Oregon members to consider options for future construction bond measures to replace the current housing bond. 2, we are encouraged Portland Housing Bureau is embarking on an update to their vision and mission statement and development of the local implementation plans for the Metro Regional Supportive Housing Program are a big step forward. But beyond those efforts, we need the city to take leadership coordinating with other key Portland Metro jurisdictions on a long-term regional plan that begins with a vision of a future that ends our crisis and tells the community how we intend to strategically end the affordable housing and homeless crisis. We need to be clear with ourselves how we will invest to create a housing and homeless service system that ends the current crisis in a defined period of time, what resources will be needed, and how we will deploy those resources from all of our sources, not one bond or measure at a time, but in a coordinated way over time to shrink unsheltered homelessness and build a housing system that ensures everyone has a home. And lastly, we support Partners for Affordable Homeownership's call on City Council this past December to build an internal city culture that is passionate about financial stability and wealth building in BIPOC communities. We need to dispel the myth that homeownership is just for moderate income households and build a program that will fund successful homeownership for households of color under 60% AMI. Partners for Affordable Homeownership, which is made up of Proud Ground, NAYA, Hacienda CDC, PCRI, Habitat for Humanity, and Urban League of Portland, identified 11,538 units are needed in Portland to eliminate the race gap in homeownership. So we encourage you to consider bold actions such as taking the North-Northeast preference policy citywide. And Portlanders for Affordable Housing had also recommended $50 million is needed to help at least 500 BIPOC households buy their first homes over the next 3 years.
Time.
I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Next, we have Tyler from Free Lunch Collective.
Good evening, commissioners. Can you hear me?
We can.
My name is Tyler. I'm with Free Lunch Collective. We're an anarchist collective which provides sack lunches to our unhoused neighbors and community members. I'm here to speak specifically on the topic of homeless sweeps, defined by the ACLU as the forced disbanding of homeless encampments on public property and the removal of both homeless individuals and their property from that area. These sweeps are a counterproductive band-aid to larger problems of classism, ableism, and addiction. The removal of these people and their belongings is a waste of resources that could be spent solving problems that come from living during multiple crises, including housing shortages, opioid use, displacement from natural disasters like wildfires, and a global pandemic. Clearing these camps is an ineffective strategy that further criminalizes poverty and terrorizes already vulnerable populations. The use of sweeps is inadequate for a number of reasons, some of which I will list now. Number one, items needed for housing get taken and lost within the sweeps, which causes unnecessary instability. It can result in houseless people losing everything from basic survival goods to important documents required to get a job or housed. These documents are not easily replaced for a population with limited funds and mobility. Number two, sweeps are especially dangerous during COVID. By uprooting people from their tents or chosen communities, the city is forcing people to disregard shelter-in-place orders. Shelters and nonprofit resources are dangerous hotspots for illnesses, especially for those at risk. There's also no guarantee that services will be accessible because the need far outstrips the availability. Number three, many people choose to strategically camp near resources they need access to for survival. Sweeps displace people away from those resources, which are designed to help them and isolate them from support. While it may seem to some property owners that there are no alternatives to homeless sweeps, I have a few ideas to offer. Instead of sweeping houseless camps, the city could work on building systems to assist those in need. Some popular ideas include offering sanitary measures such as trash collection services for people in tent communities to use. Create sanitary stations that are actually well-stocked and managed. Disperse laundry vouchers or create another program to address the lack of available laundry service when experiencing homelessness. People forced to live outside often have to toss out clothes they love that they got from nonprofits because it gets muddy and dirty in Portland rainy weather, on top of the normal hygienic struggles of living outside anywhere. Shelters provide endless amounts of clothes to those needing it, but providing laundry vouchers is more humane on top of more cost-effective. Oftentimes, the lack of access to trash cans causes folks to have an abundance of dirty clothes and trash they need to get rid of, but nowhere within a reasonable walking distance to dispose of these items. Number two, make more areas specifically dedicated for tent communities that are run by the tenants themselves and folks who come from that background. Sponsor numerous locations so there are multiple options for people in case they have a problem with an individual camp but still need shelter. Multiple areas like tiny home villages or permanent camps so that there are enough places to service the numerous people experiencing homelessness. Places like Kenton Women's Village, Right to Dream 2, and Hazelnut Grove. Number three, create spaces for people to go, but also acknowledge their autonomy to exist in public space. Support the Right to Rest Act, HB 2367, so people who find themselves in dire circumstances can live without fear of harassment, and we can move to treating our houseless neighbors with dignity and respect. With that, I conclude. Thank you.
Next, we have Tyler Gonzalez Aguirre. Tyler.
Thank you so much for giving me some time to speak this evening with everyone today. My name is Tyler Gonzalez Aguirre. I am a concerned community member. I am not affiliated with any organization. I am calling as a community member who has lived in Portland now going on 8 years. The housing and homeless crisis that we see every day, which I know every commissioner, Mayor Wheeler, you see every day because you work downtown, is outrageous. It's crazy to think that our budgets are being increased for policing and security measures, but we're continuing to see an increase in just, complete houselessness and abject poverty throughout the streets. It's very upsetting. I'm just a community member. I pay my taxes, I work, I have a second job, and I try to do what I can. And that includes when I'm driving, doing my side work for DoorDash. I constantly am being asked for money when I'm delivering food. I try to give up what I have in my pockets. It's often not much, maybe a Starbucks card that has less than 90 cents on it. It's upsetting. I'm very upset with just seeing how the city is taking the measures and thinking that they're doing what they can, but yet not pushing and actually, thinking of more alternative ways, transformative ways of how we can be a better example for the city, the state, and the nation. So I really appreciate you guys listening to me today. I really respect your time, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you so much.
The next three people we will hear from are Andy Nelson, Forrest Perkins, and Caitlin Day in that order. We will start with Andy.
Good evening, good evening, everyone. Nice to see you. I just wanted to start by thanking you all for your service and the time you're taking to listen to folks like the speaker we just heard, which is inspiring to me. I'm here just to talk about one particular issue, but it's a significant one that really fuels our homeless and housing services, and a couple of previous speakers have mentioned it. And it's an overlooked piece of really the important infrastructure that goes into our social safety net, and that is the compensation for the folks who are doing the work on the front lines. And I just wanted to illuminate with a couple of numbers of the scope of the issue and a potential solution. We know in our region, an hourly wage of about $23, $24 is considered a living wage. But at organizations like Impact Northwest and many of our social service providers, starting wages average more like $15 an hour. And in recent research that we've done, we've determined that a full 87% of our employees do not earn a living wage, and 57% earn less than $18.77 an hour. This is a substantial issue for delivery of the services that we know work. It's also an equity issue. More than half of our collective employees come from BIPOC communities. And as a previous speaker mentioned, I think it was Tony from Latino Network, we are looking for some movement in next year's budget, specifically a cost of living increase and what we can hope can be upwards of a 5% escalator so that we can catch our valued and treasured employees up to a living wage. Thanks again for your time and for listening.
Next, we have Forrest.
Hi there. Forrest Perkins, Democratic Socialists of America. I want to start with some proposed budget numbers. $149 million for homeless services, $199 million for the Housing Bureau. Now here's a bigger number, $245 million for the Portland Police. When the meeting began, you said 60% of the discretionary budget went to public safety last year. You said the majority of that went to the police. Here's one last stat. The majority of 911 calls have consistently been in response to the homeless. Yet we know the police can't help the homeless get a home. We know they can't help them get healthcare. We know they can't help them get work. A police officer has never gotten someone a home, yet that's who we are sending. The only thing the police have been reported to do is beat, harass, mace, steal belongings, and kill when they respond to these calls. My proposal is this: cut the police budget. That money could be well used in many areas. Boost the homeless services budget for immediate responses. Tyler from Free Lunch just listed some great ideas you could fund. And also boost the Housing Bureau so we can start building public housing. Thank you.
Our final comment tonight is going to come from Caitlin Day. Caitlin?
Yeah, hello, City Commissioners. My name is Caitlin, and I am a member of Western Regional Advocacy Project, as well as a local coalition of organizations, small businesses, and individuals organizing around the upcoming clean and safe contract renewal. As you all probably know, we have many concerns with the security and policing aspects of enhanced services districts, especially clean and safe. In particular, our collective is concerned with the ways in which clean and safe controls and harasses homeless people in public space. We also share many of the concerns brought up by the recent award-winning audit regarding Portland's ESDs. Our group is calling for a robust public process to engage with the contract renewal process, which you'll be hearing more about this week. I am here specifically to address concerns about general fund special appropriations money going towards clean and safe. They're slated to receive approximately $25,288. I am strongly opposed to this funding, especially when the details of the upcoming contract are not worked out. Furthermore, public money, I believe, should not be going into ESDs. ESDs explicitly benefit the property owners who make up the ESDs, and I don't believe it's appropriate that the city is providing additional funds when much of the community is not benefiting from it, and many are also being outright excluded from these services. So I strongly suggest, at the least, you hold off from providing any public funds to CleanSafe until the contract renewal process is over. I also encourage you to please commit to opening up the CleanSafe contract renewal to the public. The contract will never be truly democratic if only the city, the ESD, Office of Management and Finance, and Portland Business Alliance have a say in what happens. I believe unhoused people should really be at the forefront. And similarly to CleanSafe, I'm strongly opposed to any funding going towards the sweeps of unhoused people. This includes the demands of defund the police, which I won't get into the specifics, but there are definitely community proposals that are feasible. But also to defund entities that are allowing for sweeps. So maybe not putting as much money into Hucker, or in particular, the city's $4.5 million contract with Rapid Response. And I also want to point out how I think it was a little egregious for the city to quietly renew the Rapid Response contract in December without a robust public review. Because to my understanding, that was the promise in early 2020 when the contract was renewed for just 1 year. And that process never happened. So I suggest you really take these contract reviews seriously and don't make these same mistakes with the CleanSafe contract, especially because it's happening right now. And so I want to end with saying that tomorrow there's going to be yet another sweep at Laurelhurst Park, and residents there are really hurting, and they're very tired of the city's cat and mouse game of pushing people into all these different directions. So I implore city commissioners to truly engage with the community in the following months, as there are many important issues related to the budget, and the people most impacted are consistently excluded. And in my opinion, these listening sessions are not enough, and in a lot of ways feel like it's just a means to check a box. Just know that we're always eager to talk to you and to truly meaningfully engage in the process. But first, we really need you to meaningfully engage with us. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, we have one more commenter who has joined us actually, CMAB Husani.
Greetings, everybody. I actually have nothing to add that Caitlin hasn't said already, so I appreciate it. I'll leave her word standing.
Okay, so that concludes our public testimony period. Thank you to everyone for your comments, and I'm going to turn it back to Jen for the next steps.
Okay, thank you very much. As we mentioned at the opening of this meeting, there will be additional opportunities for comment. We have 3 additional listening sessions coming up. The next one will be on Monday, April 12th from 6 to 8 p.m. And that will be a community listening session focused on economic stabilization and recovery. After that, there will be a listening session on Saturday, April 17th from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. And that'll be a listening session on community safety. And then finally, on Wednesday, May 5th, from 6 to 8 p.m. will be the mayor's proposed budget hearing. In addition to these listening sessions, there are 2 other electronic ways of submitting testimony. The first is by going onto the website at portlandoregon.gov/CBO. You can also email testimony at budgetcomment@portlandoregon.gov. And then all of the testimony that we receive will be provided to the council offices. Next, we're going to move to closing comments from each of our city council members and our mayor. And then we'll start with Commissioner Rubio.
Thank you, everyone. First, I'd like to appreciate the City Budget Office for setting up a process that enables us to be here tonight to listen to some community voices about our budget process. And I also really want to thank the trusted community leaders who are working in this space and for sharing their experiences and their recommendations tonight, and also the community that's come forward to testify. I've been looking forward to the start of these opportunities to listen and engage more because for the last decade, I've usually been on the other side and been one of the community members providing testimony at government budget hearings. So for me, I'm pretty clear about what my job is tonight. And that is that as a city council member and as part of a city council, it is our job first and foremost to listen and learn and to center impacted communities in our decision making. And the bottom line is we need to budget to the values that I know that we have all expressed that we hold. And we need to, as one of the last people that testified, we need to meaningfully and thoughtfully engage with community as we do that. And that is not a one-shot deal. It's an iterative process every day. And at the top of that, one of those values we've all expressed is that housing is a right. And that's what I heard tonight as well. I'm hopeful that even in this time of multiple crises that are happening in our communities and to our communities, that we can produce a city budget that demonstrates all of these things. We simply have no other choice but to face these economic disparities and these structural barriers once and for all, to find a better way for all of us, including and especially our most vulnerable neighbors and our BIPOC communities. So I look forward to continuing to do my part in my job to ensure that we're creating more housing affordability, that we're creating more housing options and we're more services and wraparound supports, and that we're walking our talk about housing along with all of my colleagues. So thank you to everyone again for coming out tonight.
Thank you very much. Next, we'll hear from Commissioner Ryan.
Thank you. Thank you, Budget Office. Once again, you put together a very well-run session with the community. And thank you so much for those of you who took time out of your schedule this evening to give voice to your values and your passions around, I'd say, the issue that's really gripping every Portlander right now. There were some common themes that were clear and also not surprising, but I'd like to, I just want to call out one, a language, the use of the language hygiene infrastructure. I really appreciate that language. I think Portlanders all over the map are asking for that. I think that's why there's this openness to how we manage shelters differently, and are open to outdoor managed shelters, and how we have that hygiene infrastructure and access to services. No longer can we just assume that one is going to need to find the bricks and mortar facility that provides them, but that we are agile and that our services come to those Portlanders who need those services. And there's also more communication about the continuum. And I liked the comments about data, not just being the outcome data, the big number data, the macro data, but how can we really know each person by name? And how can we track how we're serving them and how they're moving along to build resilience so they no longer are houseless, but they're actually thriving and a part of and have stability in their lives. So the truth is, Portlanders, it's been decades since we've been here in terms of a time where we have revenue streams coming in that we can rely upon. And you're basically showing up to say we need to get it right. And I'm just grateful to serve with the council, the entire city council, that sees this as one of our #1 priorities. We are thinking out of the box, and we really all hold a shared value that everyone deserves a place where they can lay down and have a safe and restful sleep. And so I'm just grateful to be a part of a team that has those values. Anyway, thanks again for your comments. I will be reflecting on many of the things that I heard. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Commissioner Hardesty.
My computer didn't want me to unmute. I don't know what that's about. First, thank you very much to the Budget Office. Once again, a very excellent presentation and opportunity for the public thank you very, very, very much, public, for showing up and making your voice heard and advocating for the things that you care about. Several themes tonight is clearly the people who are on the front line of providing services for our most vulnerable people are the exact same people that also need the services and the housing and all the supports that they are providing for others. That is no longer acceptable. It's never been acceptable, and we have to figure out how to start the process of making sure that those frontline community members are making a living wage. It is criminal for them to work for us so diligently and not be able to afford to live in a city where they provide those services. I also heard a couple of times about a master leasing, which is not something that I'm really familiar with, but I can tell you that the number one problem in the city of Portland is that it costs too darn much to live in the city of Portland. And that is the nut that we have to crack. I certainly would not be interested in fully funding a overpriced apartment building so that we could put poor people in it, because the reason that they're empty is because nobody today who lives here can afford to live in them. So I think that we must be creative. We must look for big solutions, but we also cannot leave people on the street to themselves. They deserve services, they deserve support, and I'm hopeful that the new Metro measure will take care of people who are in temporary shelter, permanent housing, but also people who are living on our street, because that's our failure, not theirs, to not provide a place that is safe, that is secure, and that they can lay their heads at night. I look forward to the rest of our conversations. This is just the first public forum, and I encourage the public to email us, call us, make sure your voice is heard through this process. This is the beginning, not the end of our budget process. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Commissioner Mapps.
I'd like to start out by echoing the themes that many of my colleagues have touched on. I'd like to thank the Budget Office for organizing this event. I want to thank everyone who took time out of their evening in order to share their concerns about affordable housing and homelessness. And I also want to say that I'm heartened by the consensus I heard across different speakers. And in addition to that, the compatibility of the ideas that I think we heard tonight. I was taking notes throughout. I think I got everyone's testimony into my spreadsheet. And I think you can kind of break down what we heard tonight into two groups of ideas. One group of ideas deals with strategies, and another group of ideas deals with fairness. And I love all the strategies that I heard tonight. This is part of my agenda and my vision too. We heard many different folks talk about the need for alternative approaches to providing housing, things like organized camps. I'm delighted to explore that as we move forward in the future. I heard people challenge us as a government to become more innovative and more efficient. That means things like breaking down silos within City Hall and breaking down silos that separate different governments. Again and again, I think we heard the need to connect housing to services, things like connect beds to alcohol and drug treatment and mental health care. Again, I think that's a great idea, and what the future looks like. We also heard the call for culturally specific services, especially in the housing realm, and what is, like, for me, much like Commissioner Hardesty, a new idea, the concept of master leases. I'd like to learn more. So I look forward to bringing this up as we move forward throughout this. And the second theme that I heard tonight was a call for fairness. Our last speakers talked about the unfairness of sweeps. That's one of the reasons why I've encouraged my colleagues on council and the city to move very carefully as we think about where people are living now and where they need to live in the future. And I'll also note that I heard again and again and again today about the need for fairness in the wages that get paid to the folks who serve our most vulnerable neighbors. That makes sense to me too. And I hope that we can build that principle into this budget that we are putting together now. Like my colleagues, I think this is the beginning of a discussion, not the end. I want to thank everyone who got us going today. This discussion will go on for several more weeks. And we hope that you will stay engaged in this discussion as we put together a budget that serves both our city and our most vulnerable neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, we will hear from Mayor Wheeler.
Yeah, thank you. I want to thank the Budget Office. I want to thank my colleagues. Thank you especially for thoughtful comments here at the end of this session. And I want to thank the people who took the time to testify today. Obviously, the homeless crisis is, without any question, it's the biggest social issue confronting us here in the city of Portland. It's a national issue. It is certainly one that will not be easy to solve. I certainly heard all of the themes that my colleagues just described, a desire for us to be innovative, thoughtful, creative, find new and improved alternatives that are humane for those who are currently living on our sidewalks or in substandard conditions. I love the idea of infrastructure around hygiene. That's something that we are obviously working on already as both a city and a council, and former Mayor Adams is working on some of those opportunities, particularly around litter collection and engaging the homeless folks in our community and helping to provide resources. There's also a number of nonprofit efforts out there that we want to help leverage that are doing a terrific job. I also heard the concern people have about sweeps. My hope is that we get to the point where it's not necessary, that though part of what we're trying to do in our homeless to housing continuum efforts that are currently before the city council is actually open up new alternatives for well-managed and humane and hygienic camps that have access to water and to toilets and to laundry services, potentially access to navigation services, to housing. All of these are certainly good ideas, but what I really appreciated about tonight's hearing was just hearing people come to the table who have lived experience, firsthand experience, who work in this sector, who have ideas of their own that they've put on the table. And I think all of them were great. I especially want to thank Andy Gobel from Do Good Multnomah and Trevor Neeson from Transition Projects. You came at the council's request tonight to provide firsthand experience of what your organization is doing in taking the city and the county funding and really putting it to work at the ground level to serve people experiencing homelessness. And so I thank you for that context. I also want to thank you for your work on the St. John's Village, the motel programs, and the winter shelter programs, and many of the other innovations that have put into place in recent months and years. I just want to say we're really fortunate to have the nonprofit providers that we have in this community, those who testified tonight. I want to acknowledge, having heard at least 4 people talk about wages and working conditions for nonprofit providers, I want to acknowledge that I hear that and I understand that, and I know that you're stretched beyond measure with rapidly shifting programming such as motels in order to provide safe distancing, getting out COVID-19 education to those who are living outside, and continuing to serve our most vulnerable partners during what's really a challenging and, for those on the streets, a frightening year. You're the reason, and I want to underscore this, it didn't come up, you are the reason why we have such low rates of COVID-19 this year within our homeless population. And for that, everybody in the community is indebted to you. By taking care of our homeless population, you have helped the entire community. And that's something worth noting here tonight as well. So I encourage people who are just watching this, who didn't have a chance to testify, please chime in via email. I'll ask Jen to please restate the email address so people can do that. But again, thank you everybody for doing this. Jen, could you state the email address one more time for people who are maybe just tuning in and want to have their voices heard?
Sure, it's budget comment at Portland. Let me make sure I'm giving you the right one. I'm sorry. Budget comment at portlandoregon.gov.
All right, thank you. And Jessica, I'll give you the last word.
Well, that concludes this evening's listening session. And as Jen mentioned, we have 3 more. So we'll look forward to seeing everybody again in 2 weeks' time for our next listening session. And again, please sign up to testify. If you'd like to provide verbal testimony, you can go to the City Budget Office's website for the next session at www.portlandoregon.gov/CBO. We look forward to seeing you in a couple weeks.
Thank you all. Have a great night, and we'll see you soon. Thank you, everybody.